Caleb rode in on a Tuesday, or maybe a Wednesday. The days had bled together, smeared by alkali dust and a sun that hammered the high plains into a brittle, brown anvil. He rode in from the north, the direction no one came from, following a dry creek bed that offered the only cover. His horse, a gaunt bay with one watchful eye, stumbled on the loose rock. Caleb pulled the reins gentle, his own body aching in time with the animals. He had been gone 6 years, 6 years of running, 6 years of mending fence on ranges so vast you could ride for 3 days and see nothing but sky, 6 years of sleeping with his gun under a saddle pillow. He was 28, but felt closer to 50. The lines around his eyes were carved deep, not from smiling, but from squinting into that relentless sun. A scar, thin and white, ran from the corner of his left eye down to his jaw, a permanent pucker in his skin that he hid beneath a week's worth of dark stubble. His hands were rope-burned and scarred, the knuckles on his right hand thick and misplaced from a break that had never set right. Dustwood, he tasted the name. It was ash in his mouth. He had not come back for memory. He had come back because he was out of options, and the winter was coming on fast. He needed a stake, enough money for ammunition, beans, and coffee to get him through to spring, maybe enough to push west over the mountains, to the coast. Work. That was all. The town looked meaner, smaller than he remembered. The same single street, a river of pale dust, the same false-fronted buildings, their paint peeling back to raw, silvered wood. The blacksmith's hammer was silent. The stage office looked boarded up. Only the saloon and the general store showed any life, and it was a low, scuttling kind of life. He skirted the town proper, heading for the collection of outbuildings that passed for the edge of civilization. He found the old livery, run by a man even older than the building, name of Jedediah. The old man was half blind and smelled of horse liniment and cheap whiskey. "Need a stall and feed," Caleb said. His voice was rough from disuse. Jedediah squinted, his milky eyes trying to focus. "A stall costs $1 a week. Feed is extra." Caleb dropped $2 silver onto the splintered plank that served as a desk. 2 weeks, grain for the horse. I'll sleep in the loft. "Loft's 50 cents, the old man grunted, snatching the coins. Caleb added 2 more quarters. He did not bargain. He led the bay into a stall, stripped the saddle, and began rubbing the animal down with a rough sack. He worked with a slow, methodical rhythm, his movements economical. He was avoiding the town. He knew folks here, or had known them. He had no wish to see the recognition in their eyes, the calculations, the questions he would not answer. He was a ghost, and he meant to stay that way. For 2 days, he did not leave the livery. He patched the rotten boards in the loft, reorganized the tackle that lay in dusty piles, and listened. He listened to the wind, which never stopped, and to the low murmur of the town that drifted on it. He was a man coiled, waiting. He had learned to wait. On the 3rd day, the sky broke. The brittle blue turned to a bruised, low-hanging purple. The wind died, and the silence that fell was heavy, expectant. Then the rain came. It did not drift. It fell in hard. Cold sheets, drilling into the dust and turning the street into a thick, churning soup of mud. The roof of the livery leaked. Rivulets of brown water ran down the walls. Caleb pulled his bedroll into the driest corner, but the chill was absolute. He was low on tobacco and had not eaten a hot meal in days. The cold gnawed at his bones, the old brakes aching with a dull fire. He needed whiskey. He pulled his hat low, turned the collar of his canvas coat up, and stepped out into the deluge. He walked with his head down, boots sucking at the mud. The town was empty, shuttered against the storm. He made for the smaller of the 2 saloons, the one called The Last Chance. It was a squat, miserable building leaning to one side, its windows opaque with grime. He pushed the door open. The sound was a low scrape of wood on wood. Warm, foul air hit him, a thick smell of wet wool. stale beer, and unwashed men. He paused, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. It was mostly empty. 3 miners, still covered in red mud, nursed beers at one table. A freight driver he did not recognize was asleep with his head on the bar, and at a table in the darkest corner, alone, sat a woman. Caleb's heart kicked, a hard, painful jolt against his ribs. He did not need to see her face. He knew the set of her shoulders, the way the dark hair coiled at the nape of her neck. He had dreamed of it, in fitful, fevered bursts. Clara. He moved to the bar, his spurs ringing softly on the floorboards, a sound too loud in the quiet room. He kept his back to her. "Whiskey," he said to the bartender. The man slid a dirty glass and a bottle toward him. Caleb poured 2 fingers, the liquor amber in the dim light. His hand was steady. He had trained it to be steady. But inside, he was shaking. He should have taken the glass and gone back out into the rain. He should have walked away. He had promised himself he would walk away. But his feet would not move. He stood there, the whiskey burning a hole in his empty stomach, and felt her presence like a brand. "Caleb?" Her voice, it was lower than he remembered. Rougher. He turned. Slow. She was staring at him, her eyes wide in the gloom. He had forgotten how green they were, greener than any spring he had ever seen. She looked tired. There were shadows under those eyes, and a tightness around her mouth that had not been there 6 years ago. She wore a plain dress, some dark, indeterminate color, mended at the elbow. She was a widow. He knew that. He had heard it, somewhere on the trail. Clara Thorne, her husband, Silas Thorne, had broken his neck in a drunken fall from a horse 2 years back. "Hello, Clara?" he said. The 3 miners looked up, their eyes sliding from him to her, a greasy interest sparking in their faces. Clara flinched, her gaze dropping to the scarred tabletop. I didn't know you were back," she murmured. "Just got in," he lied. An awful silence stretched between them. The rain hammered the roof. The bartender wiped the same spot on the bar, watching them in the warped mirror. "What brings you back?" she asked, not looking at him. "Work." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "There's no work in Dustwood. Caleb, not for decent folk." He drank the whiskey in one tilt of his head. The burn was good. It cleared his vision. He saw her now. She was not just tired, she was cornered. The town's scorn was all over her, a physical weight on her shoulders. The miners were watching her, not as a widow to be respected, but as meat. "You look the same," she said, finally lifting her eyes. "You don't," he replied. It was blunt. It was the truth. The girl he knew had been fire and laughter, all sharp edges and soft blushes. This woman was worn smooth, like a river stone. Her chin came up. There it was, the spark. "Neither would you, if you'd buried a husband and had the whole town waiting to pick over the bones." Before he could answer, one of the miners, a big man with a wet beard, called out, "Buy you a drink, Mrs. Thorne. Must be cold, sitting all alone." Clara's hands tightened into fists on the table. "I'm fine." "Oh, don't be like that," the man said, standing up, his chair scraping. "We all know you ain't particular about your company." Caleb set his glass down. He did not slam it, just placed it. The sound was a quiet click. He did not look at the miner. He looked at Clara. "I'll walk you home," he said. It was not a question. The miner laughed. "Moving in fast, ain't you, stranger? She ain't even cold from the last one." Caleb turned his head. He did not move his body, just his head. He looked at the miner. He let the man see the scar. He let him see the dead coldness in his eyes. A look he had perfected in bunkhouses and border towns where a single word could get you killed. The miner's smile faltered. He looked at Caleb's hand, resting near the worn grip of his Colt, and then he looked back at his beer. He sat down. "I don't need an escort. Caleb, Clara said, her voice tight with shame and anger. The rain's letting up, he said, ignoring her. He threw 2 bits on the bar and walked to the door, holding it open. She stared at him for a long moment, her pride warring with the fear in her eyes. Finally, she stood, grabbed a thin, wet shawl, and walked past him out the door without a word. He followed her into the gray afternoon. The rain had softened to a miserable drizzle. They walked without speaking. Her on the flooded boardwalk, him in the mud beside it. Her house was at the far end of town, small and leaning, its paint long gone. When they reached her gate, she stopped but did not turn. "Thank you." "Clara," he started, but he did not know what to say. "I'm sorry. I missed you. I never stopped thinking about that night." The words were sawdust in his throat. "You shouldn't have," she said, her voice flat. "You just made it worse. They'll be talking about it for a week now. The widow and the drifter. Let them talk." "You can let them," she snapped, finally turning on him. Her face was pale, wet with rain. "You can ride out tomorrow. I have to live here." She turned and fled inside, the door slamming shut. Caleb stood in the mud, the cold seeping into his boots. He watched the house. No smoke came from the chimney. He heard the rumor the next day. He was in the livery, oiling his saddle, when 2 men came in to hire a buggy. They were talking loudly, careless of who heard. "Granger's finally making his move," one said. "On the widow Thorne?" "That's the one. Seems her husband, Silas, put the house up as collateral for a loan. $400. Never paid a cent. Granger's held the note for 2 years. Now he's calling it in." "400? She ain't got 400 cents. "That's the point. Granger wants the land. Only water access on that side of town. He'll tear that shack down and run his cattle through. What's she gonna do?" "What can she do? Granger owns the judge. He owns the sheriff. She's got till the end of the month." Caleb's hand stopped, the oiled rag clenching in his fist. Granger. He knew the name. A big man, all ambition and appetite, who had started with nothing and now owned half the county. A man who did not like to be told no. He forced himself to stay put. It was not his fight. He was here for work. He was a ghost. Ghosts did not get involved. But that afternoon, he found himself needing supplies. Coffee, flour, bullets. He walked to the general store, his senses on high alert. The town felt different, now that he knew she was in trouble. He saw Granger's men everywhere, 3 of them, identifiable by the silver conchos on their hatbands, lounging outside the bank. He entered the store. It was warm, smelling of cinnamon, bolt cloth, and cured tobacco. Mrs. Mulligan, the proprietor's wife, gave him a thin, disapproving look. "Help you?" "Coffee, cartridges, 44. As she was measuring out the beans, the bell over the door tinkled. Clara came in. The store went quiet. "Mrs." Mulligan's lips pursed into a thin line. Clara walked to the counter, her head held high, though Caleb could see a tremor in her hands. "Mrs. Mulligan, I need a sack of flour and a gallon of kerosene. On my account. I'll be paying at the end of the week." "Your account is closed, Mrs. Thorne," the woman said, her voice loud enough for the entire store to hear. "Closed as of this morning. Mr. Granger's orders." Clara's face went white. "Mr. Granger has no say over my credit. He has say over this store, Mrs." Mulligan snapped. "And I'll not be left holding the bag when he takes your house. No more credit. Cash only." I don't have cash right now. We all just need Mrs. Thorne," the woman said, turning her back. "Now, if you'll excuse me, this gentleman is waiting." Caleb watched Clara. She stood there, frozen, humiliated. 2 other women in the store whispered behind their hands, their eyes pitiless. Clara turned to leave, Her shoulders slumped. "Wait," Caleb's voice cut through the quiet. He stepped forward, placing his pouch on the counter. He looked at Mrs. Mulligan. "Give her the flour and the kerosene." "Mrs." Mulligan's eyes widened. "Sir, I told you." "I'm paying," Caleb said. He pushed a $5 gold piece across the wood. "Take it out of that." Clara stared at him, her face a mask of shame and fury. "Caleb, no, I don't want your charity." "It ain't charity, it's a sack of flour," he said, his voice low. He never looked at her. He kept his eyes on Mrs. Mulligan. "Get it." The woman, seeing the gold, hurried to comply. She shoved the flour sack and the kerosene can onto the counter. Caleb pushed them toward Clara. "Go on," he said. She grabbed them, her face burning, and hurried out of the store without a word of thanks. Caleb gathered his own supplies, as Mrs. Mulligan counted his change, her hands trembling slightly. He spoke. "You tell Granger," he said, his voice barely a murmur. "You tell him he should pick on someone his own size." He walked out. He saw Clara struggling down the street, the flour sack heavy on her shoulder. He followed, keeping his distance. He was not protecting her. He was just watching. He watched her stumble, watched her right the sack and keep walking. A small, defiant figure against the vast, indifferent sky. He followed her all the way to her gate. He watched her go inside, then he turned and walked back to the livery. He tried to put her out of his mind. He sat in the loft, cleaning his rifle, counting his money. He had $37 left. Not enough. Not nearly enough. He had to find work. Maybe ride south, try the ranches near the border. But as dusk fell, the cold set in again. He thought of her small, leaning house. He thought of the chimney with no smoke. He thought of her trying to split her own wood, her small hands unused to the weight of an axe. He cursed, low and bitter. He stood up. He grabbed his own axe from his saddle roll. He found her in the small yard behind her house, fighting with a wet, gnarled log. She was using a dull hatchet, weeping with frustration, the blade bouncing off the damp wood. He did not say a word. He walked past her, took the heavier axe, and set a log on the block. The axe fell. Thunk! The wood split clean. Clara jumped, startled, her hand flying to her chest. "Caleb, you scared me half to death." He just nodded, setting another piece. Thunk! "I told you," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't need your help." Thunk! The woodpile grew. He worked with a grim efficiency, the rhythm steady, hypnotic. He was splitting a week's worth of wood in minutes. She stood there, hugging herself against the cold, watching him. The anger in her face softened, replaced by a weary sadness. When he finished the pile, he looked at the house. A section of shingles on the roof was curled and broken from the storm. "You got a ladder?" he asked. It's behind the shed, but it's broken." He retrieved it. One of the rungs was snapped. He found a stray piece of planking, sawed it to size with his own bow saw, and fixed it in the fading light. He climbed onto the low roof. He had a handful of nails and a hammer from his roll. He was always fixing things. It was all he was good for. He worked until the sky was a deep, star-filled purple. When he climbed down, she was still there, a dark shape by the back door. "I have stew," she said. Her voice was so quiet he almost missed it. "It's not much, just potatoes." He hesitated. He was starving, but he knew, if he went inside that house, he was crossing a line. The ghost was becoming a man again, and being a man was dangerous. "And I have some whiskey," she added, a desperate edge to her voice. "A bottle Silas left." He looked at her. He could barely make out her face in the dark, but he could feel the fragile tremor of her invitation. "All right," he said, his voice rough. "Stew sounds good." The house was colder than the air outside. A single, sad fire guttered in the old pot-bellied stove, giving off more smoke than heat. The furniture was sparse and broken. A table, 2 chairs, a dry sink. Her late husband had been a drinker, not a carpenter. She ladled the stew into 2 bowls. It was thin, watery, with a few pale chunks of potato. He ate it standing by the stove, soaking up the meager warmth. She sat at the table, picking at her own. "Why did you come back, Caleb?" she asked, her voice low. "I told you, work." "There's no work," she repeated. "Only Granger, and he doesn't pay in coin." She looked down at her hands. "You heard what he's doing, about the house." "I heard. So you see, you're helping. It doesn't mean anything. He'll take it anyway. This house, the wood, it'll all be his." "Maybe." She looked up, her green eyes flashing. "Not maybe. He will, unless I—" "Unless you what?" "He offered," she whispered, her face crumbling. "He said he'd forget the debt if I was neighborly." Caleb's hand tightened on his empty bowl. He set it down, very carefully, on the stove. "He'll have this house over my dead body," she said, the fire back. "I'll burn it down myself before I let him touch me." She stood and retrieved the bottle from a cupboard. It was rye, cheap, harsh. She poured 2 inches into a tin cup and handed it to him. She poured one for herself. They drank in silence. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose window frame. He watched her. She was a stranger, this hard-bitten widow, and yet she was the only person he had truly known in his entire life. He remembered her at 17, her hair down, laughing as they ran through the high grass by the creek. He remembered the smell of wild mint and summer dust. And he remembered the night, the one night, in her father's barn. A week before she was promised to Silas Thorne, a secret, desperate, fumbling night that had seared itself into his memory. He finished the whiskey. It did nothing to warm him. "I should go," he said, moving toward the door. "The roof should hold." He put his hand on the latch. "Caleb!" He stopped. He heard her stand, the chair scraping. He did not turn. "Take it off like before." The words were a whisper, barely audible, but they hit him like a shotgun blast. He froze, his hand locked on the iron latch. The cold metal bit into his skin. "Take it off." She had said that. That night, she had been bold, terrified, and alive. She had unhooked the 12 tiny buttons on her dress, her fingers shaking, and said it. A challenge, a plea. He turned, slowly. She was standing by the table, bathed in the weak, flickering light from the stove. She was not the girl in the barn. She was a woman, a widow, desperate, and she was looking at him with a raw, terrifying hunger that matched his own. Her hands were at the collar of her drab dress, her fingers on the first button. His heart, which he had thought long dead, hammered against his ribs. He remembered her as she was. He saw her as she is, a widow, a pariah, and she was asking him to erase the years, the pain, the shame. He stood there, frozen, the past and the present colliding in that cold, dark room. And he did not know how to move. Caleb did not move. He stood, his hand still on the latch, a dead man brought back to a life he did not want. The space between them was 3 yards of cold floorboards, but it felt like a canyon. He watched her fingers, white-knuckled, fumbling with the small, cloth-covered button at her throat. "Clara," he said. His voice was a rasp, a warning. "Do not—" "Why not?" she asked, her voice low and fierce, challenging him. The button came free. Her fingers moved to the next. "It is the only thing I have left to trade, is it not? You said it yourself. I have changed, worn out. Maybe I am not worth what Granger is offering." "Stop it." He took a step away from the door, into the room. "Or maybe," she continued, her eyes locked on his, dark and bottomless in the firelight. "You are just like them. You came back to see the ruins, to see the loose widow of Dustwood finally live up to her name. Her fingers worked faster. Another button. The gray wool parted, showing the pale line of her collarbone. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He grabbed her hands, stilling them. His grip was hard, the calluses on his palms scraping her skin. Her hands were ice cold, trembling violently. But she did not pull away. She just stared up at him, her breath coming in short, sharp hitches. "You think this is what I want?" he whispered, his face close to hers. He could smell the rye on her breath, sharp and sad, and beneath it, the faint, familiar scent of soap and wood smoke that was just her. "It is what all men want," she whispered back, her voice breaking. A warm body on a cold night, something to use and discard. "Am I all men, Clara?" She looked at him, the challenge in her eyes faltering, replaced by a deep, aching vulnerability. A tear escaped, tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. "You were, once, you were the only one who was not—" Her voice failed. He let go of one of her hands, and his thumb, rough as sandpaper, brushed the tear from her face. His touch was hesitant, almost clumsy. He had not touched another person with gentleness in 6 years. His fingers were trained for rope, for triggers, for an axe handle. Her eyes closed at his touch. She leaned into his hand, a small, involuntary movement, like a starving animal seeking warmth. That small movement broke him. The discipline he had honed for years, the walls he had built around his heart, crumbled to dust. He was not a ghost. He was a man, and he was starving, too. He brought his other hand up to cup her face. She was so thin. He could feel the fine bones of her cheeks beneath his palms. "Clara," he said again, just her name, a prayer. And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was clumsy, desperate, fueled by 6 years of loneliness and a lifetime of regret. It was all the words they could not say. His mouth was hard against hers. Chapped lips meeting chapped lips. He tasted the whiskey and the salt of her tears. She was stiff at first, frozen in his grasp, and then, with a sound that was half a sob, she kissed him back. Her hands, free now, came up to grip his coat, clutching the rough canvas as if she were drowning. She opened her mouth to him, and it was a surrender, a desperate plea. He kicked the chair out of the way, pulling her closer, backing her toward the weak warmth of the stove. His hand slid from her face, down her neck, to her shoulders. He could feel the sharp ridge of her spine through the thin dress. He was shaking. He had faced down armed men without a tremor. But this woman, this ghost from his past, made him tremble like a leaf. He was terrified of breaking her. She felt so fragile, as if she were made of glass. He pulled back, just an inch, breathing hard, resting his forehead against hers. "We should not," he breathed, the words torn from him. "I do not care," she whispered, her eyes still closed. "I am so cold. Caleb, I am so tired of being cold." She reached up, her fingers finding the buttons of his coat. He was wearing 2, a canvas outer coat and a worn wool shirt beneath. She worked the buttons open, her movements frantic now, no longer hesitant. She pushed the coat off his shoulders, and it fell to the floor. She put her cold hands on his chest, splaying her fingers against the warmth of his shirt. He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper. He learned the shape of her mouth anew. He had forgotten nothing. He lifted her, his arms sliding under her legs, and carried her the few feet to the threadbare rug in front of the stove. It was the only soft place in the house. He laid her down and followed, stretching out beside her, his body shielding hers from the drafts that snaked across the floor. He did not take off her dress. She did not take off his shirt. They just held each other, their bodies pressed together, sharing warmth. For a long time, they did not move. They just breathed. The fire in the stove crackled, casting faint, dancing shadows on the walls. The wind howled its lonely song. He could feel her heart beating against his, fast and erratic, like a trapped bird. He ran his hand over her hair, smoothing the dark, tangled strands. "You will leave again," she murmured into his chest. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. "I am no good for you, Clara," he said, his voice rough. "I am poison. Everything I touch—" "Shh." She placed her fingers against his lips. "Do not talk. Not tonight. Just stay. Stay until morning." He knew he should go. He knew this was a mistake, a weakness that would cost them both. He was a wanted man. He had a price on his head in Texas for a killing he had not committed. A bar fight gone wrong where he had been the only one left standing when the marshals arrived. He could not save her. He could barely save himself. Bringing his trouble to her door would only give Granger another weapon. But her hand was on his cheek, her skin soft despite the cold. She was looking at him, and the desperate hunger had been replaced by a quiet, profound sadness that mirrored his own. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I know," he said. "Me too." He was afraid of what he was feeling, this ache in his chest, this thawing of parts he had long thought frozen solid. He was afraid of the hope she represented, because hope was a dangerous, foolish thing in a world like this. She pulled his head down and kissed him again. A soft, searching kiss that held no desperation, only a deep, shared loneliness. And this time, when her fingers went to the buttons of her dress, he did not stop her. He helped her, his rough fingers clumsy on the small, cloth-covered loops. She helped him with his shirt. They undressed in the dim, flickering light, their movements slow, almost reverent, their bodies pale and scarred in the gloom. His, lean and hard, crisscrossed with old wounds. Hers, thin, her ribs stark, her skin bearing the faint, silvery marks of a child she had carried and lost. They came together not in a blaze of passion, but with a quiet, trembling intensity. It was a joining of two solitary, wounded creatures, finding a moment of grace in a harsh, unforgiving world. They moved slowly, rediscovering each other, relearning a language their bodies had never forgotten. It was clumsy and tender and heartbreakingly real. He worried he would hurt her, that his rough hands and his hardened body would be too much. But she met his desperation with her own, her nails digging into his back, her quiet sobs muffled against his shoulder. Afterward, they lay tangled on the rug, covered by his canvas coat. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers, and the cold of the room pressed in on them. Caleb felt a profound sense of peace, something he had not felt in years. He also felt a profound sense of dread. Clara was asleep, or pretending to be. Her breathing was even, her face turned toward his chest. He watched her in the dying light, memorizing the shape of her face, the smudge of soot on her cheek, the way her dark eyelashes rested against her pale skin. He had done a terrible thing. He had given her a reason to hope, and he was a man who had no right to deal in hope. He must have drifted off. When he woke, gray, watery light was filtering through the dirty window. The house was deathly cold. The fire was out. Clara was gone from his arms. He sat up, his body stiff and aching. The coat fell away. He saw her across the room, by the dry sink, her back to him. She was fully dressed, her hair pulled back into its severe knot. She was scrubbing a pot with a furious, jerky motion. "Clara," he said. She went still. She did not turn. "You should go." Her voice was flat, dead. Caleb got to his feet, pulling on his shirt, his pants. He felt exposed, foolish. "Clara, last night." "Last night was a mistake." She finally turned. Her face was pale, her eyes hard, all the softness of the night gone, erased. "It was a moment of weakness. I was cold, I was lonely. It meant nothing." The words hit him like a slap. He stood there, bare-chested, his boots in his hand, and felt a cold deeper than the morning air. "You do not mean that," he said, his voice low. "I do," she cried, slamming the pot down. "What did you think? That you could ride back into town, be a hero, and I would fall into your arms? That we would just— What, ride off into the sunset?" She laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "Look at this place, Caleb. Look at me. There is no sunset. There is just dust and debt and men like Granger. And then there is you." "What about me?" "You are worse than Granger. He is a snake, and he shows his fangs. You come here with your quiet help and your sad eyes, and you make me remember. You make me want things I cannot have. I cannot afford you, Caleb. I cannot afford this feeling. It is a luxury." "Clara, it is not a luxury. It is a lost night." She cut him off, her voice sharp. "That is all. I will not be your charity case. I will not be your whore. I will handle Granger myself." "How?" he demanded, pulling on his boots, his anger rising to meet hers. "By burning the house down. By letting him drive you out with nothing." "That is my business," she shouted. "Not yours. You left me once. Caleb, you left me to marry Silas, and you never looked back. Do not pretend to be my savior now." "I do not need saving." Her words struck home. "You left me once." It was true. He had left. He had been young, stupid, and terrified of her father, of Silas Thorne, of settling down. He had run, and she had paid the price. "I am not trying to be your savior," he said, his voice quiet, all the anger gone, replaced by the old, familiar ache. He picked up his coat. I was just— "Go," she said, turning her back to him again. "Please, just go, before you make things worse." He stood there for a long moment, watching her rigid back. He wanted to go to her, to turn her around, to shake her, to tell her she was wrong. But he knew she was right. He was trouble. He was a man with a past that was breathing down his neck. He had no right to tangle her in it. He walked to the door. He opened it. The cold air hit him. "Clara," he said one last time. She did not move. He stepped outside and pulled the door shut, the latch clicking into place with a sound of finality. He walked back to the livery, his head down, the town waking up around him. He saw the smoke from chimneys, heard a dog bark, saw the curtains in windows twitch as he passed. He felt like a fool, a damned, lonely fool. He reached the livery and went straight to his horse. He began to saddle the bay, his movements quick, angry. He would ride out, south. He would find that work. He would forget her face, forget the feel of her skin, forget the sound of her voice in the dark. He would become a ghost again. Ghosts did not feel. He was just cinching the saddle when he heard them. A group of riders, 4 of them. They rode past the livery entrance at a slow, deliberate walk, heading toward the end of town, heading toward her house. At the front was Harlan Granger. Caleb's blood ran cold. Granger was a big man, as he remembered, thick in the chest and the belly, riding a horse too fine for a town like this. He wore a tailored coat and a clean hat. Beside him rode the sheriff, a man named Bodie, a weasel with a tin star, and behind them, 2 of Granger's hired men, the ones with the silver conchos, their hands resting on their saddle horns, near their guns. Caleb's hand dropped from the saddle. He stood, frozen, listening. He could not just ride away. He could not. He tied the bay's reins to the stall and walked out of the livery, keeping to the shadows of the buildings. He followed them. When he reached her street, they were already there, dismounted, standing in a line in her yard. The gate was open, hanging crookedly. Clara was on the porch, her thin shawl clutched around her. She looked small, defiant, and terrified. "Mrs. Thorne," Granger said. His voice was smooth, oily, like a preacher selling damnation. "A lovely morning." "What do you want, Granger?" Clara's voice shook, but she held her ground. "Just a simple business matter." Granger produced a piece of paper from his coat pocket. "As you know, your late husband, Silas, was a man of poor judgment. He borrowed a sum from me, $400, against this property. The note is 2 years past due. I have been patient, more than patient, considering our friendship." His eyes roamed over her, and Caleb felt a hot, murderous rage build in his chest. "We are not friends," Clara said. "A pity," Granger smiled. "Well, friendship aside, business is business. The note is due. I am here to collect $400, or the deed to the property." "I do not have $400, and you know it," she said. "I do know it," Granger agreed, his voice still pleasant. "Which is why I am prepared to take the land. Sheriff Bodie here has the paperwork. A writ of seizure, all legal, all proper." "It is not proper," Clara cried. "That loan was a fraud. Silas told me he never borrowed that much. He said you tricked him when he was drunk." Granger's smile tightened. "Slander, Mrs. Thorne. And against a dead man, no less. Tisk. The court will not see it that way. You have 1 hour to gather your personal effects and vacate the premises. After that, my men will clear the property." "Clear it?" "Burn it," Granger said, his voice turning hard. "It is an eyesore. I intend to run my cattle through here, and I will not have this shack blighting the landscape." A small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, Mrs. Mulligan from the store, Jedediah from the livery. They stood at a distance, watching, their faces blank, curious, afraid. No one spoke, no one moved to help. They were watching the loose widow get her due. "You cannot," Clara whispered, her hands gripping the porch rail. "This is my home." "It was your home, madam. It is now my land." Granger motioned to his 2 men. "Go on, boys. Help the lady with her things." The 2 men grinned and started toward the porch. One of them, a lanky man with yellow teeth, winked at Clara. "We'll be real helpful, ma'am." Clara recoiled, backing toward her door. That was when Caleb stepped out. He walked out from the side of the neighboring house, into the middle of the yard. He did not say a word. He just stood there, his canvas coat hanging open, his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. Everyone froze. Granger turned, his eyes narrowing. "Well, who is this?" "That's the drifter, boss," the yellow-toothed man said, stopping. "The one who caused trouble at the store." "Caleb," Clara breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "No!" "Granger," Caleb said, his voice quiet, but it carried in the cold air. "You are on private property." "Friend," Granger said, resting a hand on his own holstered pistol. "My property." "Not yet it ain't," Caleb said. "The lady said you tricked her husband." Granger laughed. "The lady says a lot of things. That is why she has the reputation she does. Now, I suggest you move along. This is not your affair." "You are not burning this house," Caleb said. The smile vanished from Granger's face. "Sheriff, remove this man." Sheriff Bodie, who had been trying to look invisible, licked his lips. He hitched up his pants and stepped forward, his hand hovering near his gun. "Now, look here. You heard Mr. Granger. You are interfering with a legal proceeding. You need to come with me." "Are you his law, Bodie?" Caleb asked, not looking at him. "Or the town's?" Bodie faltered. "I am the law." "Then do your job. Stop this. You know it is wrong." "What I know," Granger cut in, his voice like ice, "is that you have 5 seconds to leave, or my men will make you leave." The 2 hired guns fanned out, their hands dropping to their guns. They were range toughs, hired for this exact moment. They looked at Caleb and saw a lone man, a drifter. "Caleb, please," Clara begged from the porch. "Go. It is not worth it." Caleb looked at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, the shame, and the small, flickering ember of hope she was trying to hide. He turned back to Granger. "You heard the lady," Granger sneered. "Go on." Caleb, he could not. He had run once. He would not run again. "I am not going anywhere," Caleb said. The yellow-toothed man went for his gun. He was fast, but Caleb was faster. He had lived for 6 years by being faster. Caleb's Colt seemed to leap into his hand. He did not fire. He moved, closing the distance, and slammed the heavy barrel of the pistol against the side of the man's head, a sickening crack, and the man folded, dropping into the mud without a sound. The second man, startled, fumbled his draw. Caleb was on him, his left fist connecting with the man's jaw. It was a brutal, solid punch, all his weight behind it. The man stumbled back, spitting blood and a tooth. Caleb hit him again, in the gut, doubling him over, and then brought his knee up into the man's face. It was over in seconds. 2 men were down, groaning, one unconscious. Caleb stood, breathing hard, his pistol still in his hand, pointed at the ground. Sheriff Bodie had his gun out, but he was holding it limply, his face sheet white, his hands shaking. Granger was apoplectic. His face was purple with rage. His own gun was half drawn. You assaulted my men," he sputtered. "Sheriff, arrest him! Arrest this man!" Caleb raised his pistol, not at Granger, but at Bodie. The sheriff flinched and took a step back. "He drew on me," Caleb said, his voice a low growl. "You all saw it. It was self-defense." The crowd murmured. They had seen it. "This changes nothing," Granger bellowed. "You can assault my men. You can threaten the sheriff, but you cannot stop the law. This house is mine." "Then you will have to come through me to take it," Caleb said. Granger stared at him, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. He looked at his 2 men, broken in the mud. He looked at the trembling sheriff, and he looked at Caleb, a man who had not flinched, a man who looked like he had nothing left to lose. Granger smiled, a slow, terrible smile. I see it all now. The loose widow has found herself a protector, a gunman. How touching." He put his hand down, away from his gun. "You have won this moment, friend," he said, his voice soft again. "But the day is long, and the month is not over. You have made a very powerful enemy today. Both of you." He tipped his hat to Clara. "Mrs. Thorne, enjoy your guest." He turned, deliberately, and walked to his horse. He mounted, slow. "Body, get my men." The sheriff, looking relieved, holstered his pistol and hurried to help the 2 groaning men. Granger sat on his horse, watching Caleb. "I will find out who you are. Drifter," he promised. "And I will use it to tear you down, and I will enjoy watching her fall with you." He pulled his horse's head around and rode away, calm, unhurried. The sheriff and the 2 wounded men scrambled to follow. The crowd, seeing the violence was over, began to disperse, talking in low, excited whispers. They had their story for the week. Caleb stood in the yard, the adrenaline draining out of him, leaving him cold and empty. His knuckles were split and bleeding. He turned to the porch. Clara was staring at him, her face a mask of horror. He holstered his pistol. "He is gone, for now." He started to walk toward her. "Get out," she whispered. He stopped. "What?" Get out," she screamed, her voice cracking. She grabbed a small, potted plant from the railing and threw it. It shattered at his feet. "Get away from my house!" "Clara, I was helping." "Helping?" she shrieked, her control finally snapping. "You call that helping? You just declared war on him. You fool! You just stood in my yard and pointed a gun at the sheriff. Do you know what you have done?" "I stopped him." "You stopped him for a day. And what about tomorrow? What about when he comes back? He said it. He will ruin me. And now, thanks to you, he will ruin you, too. You have just tied a rope around both our necks." She was sobbing now, deep, tearing sobs of rage and terror. "I told you to go," she wept, sinking down onto the porch steps. "I told you. You just make everything worse. You always make everything worse." Caleb stood in the mud, his bleeding hands at his sides, surrounded by the whispers of the town and the wreckage of his good intentions. She was right. He had not saved her. He had just painted a bigger target on her back, and on his own. "Clara, leave me alone," she sobbed into her hands. Just leave me alone." He stood there, a ghost in the morning sun, unable to move, unable to speak. He had fought for her, and in doing so, he had lost her all over again. Caleb did not go back to the livery, not right away. He walked. He left her yard, her sobs chasing him like hornets, and he walked out onto the prairie, away from the town, away from the smell of wood smoke and judgment. The wind was cold, a high, thin whine that cut through his coat. He walked until the anger cooled, until his split knuckles stopped throbbing and just ached with a dull, heavy beat. He had been a fool. She was right. He had come in, all bluster and violence, and thought he could fix 6 years of misery with a well-aimed punch. He had not saved her. He had just given Granger a face to hate, a target to aim at. He had made himself her liability, her anchor. He sat on a rock overlooking the dry creek bed. The town a collection of mean little lights in the distance. He should ride out. He should saddle the bay and be in the next county by morning. It was the smart thing to do. It was the right thing to do. For her, he was a wanted man. He was a ghost. Ghosts had no business fighting for the living. But he thought of her face when Granger's men had approached the porch. He thought of the sound of her voice in the dark, the feel of her skin against his. He thought of her, alone in that house, waiting for Granger to make his next move. He cursed, a low, bitter sound that the wind snatched away. He could not run, not this time. He returned to Dustwood after midnight, slipping into the livery like a shadow. He climbed to the loft and lay in his bedroll, his gun in his hand, and stared at the dark, leaking roof. He did not sleep. For 3 days, he was invisible. He haunted the edges of the town. He paid the old man Jedediah another week's coin for the stall in the loft, and he spent his time watching. He saw Granger's men. They were not subtle. One of them, a man with a bandaged head from Caleb's pistol whip, sat on a horse across the street from Clara's house, just watching. Another loitered near the general store. They were not trying to intimidate her. They were waiting. They were cutting her off, like a pack of wolves isolating a wounded deer. The townspeople completed the siege. When Clara ventured out, a path cleared around her. Mrs. Mulligan, standing on her front porch, loudly announced to a neighbor that she was cleaning her shelves of spoiled goods. The miners at the saloon made lewd jokes, loud enough for her to hear as she passed. She was the drifter's woman now, which, in their eyes, was a step below the loose widow she had been. Caleb watched it all from alleys and behind rain barrels, his insides twisting into a cold knot. He stayed away from her. He respected her wish, her desperate, angry plea for him to leave her alone. But he did not leave her unprotected. On the 4th night, the temperature plummeted. The sky was a low, bruised purple, heavy with the promise of a storm. A bitter wind swept down from the mountains, rattling windows and pushing dust into every crack. Caleb, huddled in the livery loft, knew the cold. He knew she would be low on fuel, low on kerosene. Her light, which he watched for every night, had been burning dimmer and for shorter hours. He saw her leave her house just as the sun bled away behind the hills. The light was bad, a gray, flat gloom that turned the town to shades of ash. She was clutching a small coin purse and an empty kerosene can. She was walking fast, her head down, her thin shawl pulled tight. Caleb melted out of the livery. He kept a block between them, moving through the parallel alley, his boots silent in the dust. He watched her enter the general store. He saw her through the window, arguing with Mulligan, who finally, grudgingly, took her coins and filled the can. She emerged, her shoulders slumped, and started the long walk back. The street was empty. The wind howled, a rising shriek that masked other sounds. It was almost full dark. He was 50 yards behind her when they came for her. They did not come from the front. They came from the narrow gap between the assay office and the bathhouse, shadows detaching from deeper shadows. 2 of them. Not Granger's men. He did not recognize them. They were local trash, men who hung around the saloon, looking for easy prey. They had seen her shunned, seen her marked. They figured she was free for the taking. "Evening, Mrs. Thorne," one of them slurred, stepping in front of her. He was a big, beefy man with a stained duster. "Awful cold out. Let us warm you up." Clara gasped and tried to step back, but the second man, smaller and quicker, grabbed her arm. "In a hurry? We just want to be neighborly." She cried out, a short, sharp sound, and swung the kerosene can. It connected with the smaller man's head. He yelped and let go, staggering back. "Why, you bitch!" the big one snarled, and he lunged, grabbing her. Caleb was no longer moving like a ghost. He was moving like a cougar. He covered the 50 yards in a dead, silent run. The big man had Clara pinned against the wall, one hand over her mouth, the other fumbling at her dress. The smaller man was rubbing his head, then saw Caleb coming and drew a knife. "Get him!" the big one grunted. The small man rushed, the knife held low. Caleb did not slow down. He had faced men with knives before. He met the man's rush, not with his gun, but with his body. He sidestepped the wild thrust, caught the man's wrist, and used the man's own momentum to run him head first into the solid wood wall of the assay office. The sound was a dull, wet thud. The man dropped the knife and slid to the ground, unconscious. The big man, startled, let go of Clara and turned, reaching for a pistol tucked in his belt. He never cleared the leather. Caleb was on him. This was not a fight, it was an execution. All the rage, all the frustration of the last few days, all the self-hatred. He focused it into his fists. He hit the man in the throat, a hard, chopping blow that crushed his windpipe. The man gagged, his eyes wide with panic. Caleb hit him in the stomach, doubling him over, and then hit him twice in the face, hard. Snapping his head back, the man crumpled, spitting blood and gasping like a landed fish. Caleb stood over him, his chest heaving. He wanted to kill him. He wanted to stomp the life out of him. He looked at Clara. She was huddled against the wall, her eyes wide with terror, her hands at her torn collar. She was staring at him, not with gratitude, but with the same fear she had shown her attackers. She was looking at him like he was a monster. The wind howled, and the first hard drops of rain began to fall. Cold. He heard a shout from the saloon. "What was that?" He grabbed Clara's arm. Her arm, not her hand. It was not a gentle gesture. "We have to go, now." "My house," she whispered, shaking. "No, not your house. It is watched. They will be here in a minute." He pulled her, hard. "Run!" He did not take her down the street. He pulled her back through the alley, into the labyrinth of sheds and wood piles behind the town. The rain came down. A sudden, violent deluge. It was ice cold, stinging their faces. In seconds, they were soaked. "Where are we going?" she cried, stumbling in the dark and the mud. "Just run!" He knew where. He had seen it on his walks. An old trapper's cabin, a mile north of the town, hidden in a small stand of pine up on the ridge. It was their only chance. They ran. They scrambled up the slick, muddy bank, slipping and falling. Caleb dragged her up, his grip iron on her arm. The rain was a solid wall of water, so loud he could not hear if they were being followed. He just assumed they were. They burst into the small clearing. The cabin was a dark shape, leaning, half collapsed. He kicked the door. The rotten wood splintered, and the door fell inward. He pushed her inside and followed, slamming the broken door back into its frame and wedging it shut with his shoulder. For a moment, they just stood in the absolute darkness, panting, dripping, their breath clouding in the black. The only sound was the roar of the rain on the thin roof and the wind shrieking through the cracks in the walls. "Caleb," Clara whispered, her teeth chattering. I cannot feel my hands." He fumbled in his coat, his own fingers numb. He found his match safe. It was dry. He struck a match. The small, yellow flame illuminated a single, miserable room. A dirt floor, a stone fireplace choked with old leaves and nests, a rotted bunk in the corner. The air smelled of rat droppings and wet decay. He saw her face. It was streaked with mud and tears. Her lips blue. She was shaking so violently she could barely stand. Survival. First, he went to the fireplace. He shoved the old leaves aside. With his knife, he began shaving thin, dry splinters from the underside of the broken bunk. He was methodical, his hands moving with practiced speed. He built a small pile. He struck another match. The flame caught. It was weak, sputtering. He shielded it with his body, blowing gently, nursing it. The splinters caught, and a small, hopeful fire began to crackle. He added larger pieces of the bunk. The fire grew, pushing the deathly cold back a few feet, filling the small cabin with flickering, dancing light. He turned to her. She was standing where he had left her, a statue of misery, water pooling at her feet. "Get out of those clothes," he said. His voice was flat, hard. She just stared at him, uncomprehending. "Your dress is soaked. It will kill you." He grabbed a piece of the rotten canvas ticking from the bunk. It was damp, but not soaked. "Dry yourself. Get by the fire." She did not move. He stepped toward her. "Clara, now." She tried to unbutton her dress, but her fingers were numb. Useless. She fumbled, a small, frustrated sob escaping her. Caleb pushed her hands aside, his own touch impersonal, efficient. He worked the buttons, his rough fingers popping them free. The wet wool was heavy, clinging. He peeled it from her shoulders, down her arms, and let it fall to the dirt floor. She stood in her thin, soaked chemise, shivering, her arms crossed over her chest. "All of it," he said. He did not look at her body. He looked at her face. She hesitated. Then, with a look of utter defeat, she stripped off the wet chemise. She was naked, thin, her ribs stark in the firelight, her skin covered in goose flesh. He threw the canvas at her. She wrapped it around herself and huddled by the fire, her back to him. Caleb turned and stripped off his own coat, his shirt, his undershirt. They were all soaked. He wrung them out and hung them on the broken table near the fire. He was bare-chested, his skin cross-hatched with old white scars, steaming in the heat. He kept his pants on. He sat on the other side of the fire, his back against the cold stone, and began to clean his knife. The rain hammered the roof. The fire crackled. The silence in the cabin stretched, thick and heavy. They were going to," she finally said, her voice a small, broken thing. "I know." He did not look up from his knife. You hit him." "Yes. You almost killed them." He stopped wiping the blade. He looked at her. She was watching him, her eyes huge in the firelight, the canvas clutched at her throat. "I should have," he said, his voice flat. She flinched, as if he had struck her. "You are like them. You are just violent. It is all you know." He went back to cleaning his knife. It is what I had to do. You are alive. You are safe. That is all." "Safe?" she laughed, a hysterical, choked sound. "Safe. I am in a ruined shack, in the middle of a storm, with a man who just beat 2 men half to death. A man who the whole town thinks is my lover. A man who has ruined what little I had left. You call this safe?" "It is safer than that alley," he said, his voice cold. "Is it?" she shot back. "Or did you just save me for yourself?" He stood up. He walked to the fire, took a burning branch, and walked to the single grimy window. He stood there, staring out into the black, streaming night, his back to her. His body was tense, coiled. "If you think that," he said, his voice low, "then you should have taken your chances with them. You think I want this? You think I want to be here? You think I want to be the man who cleans up the messes?" He turned on her, his face a mask of cold fury in the firelight. "I left, just like you told me to. I walked away, and I watched. I watched them circle you. I watched the town tear you apart. And I did nothing, because you told me to. And what was your reward? An alley, 2 drunken animals, and a town that would have blamed you for it in the morning." He jabbed the burning branch toward her. "This is the world, Clara. This is Dustwood. There are no saviors. There are just wolves and other wolves. I am just the one on your side." She stared at him, her anger draining away, replaced by a deep, bone-weary sadness. She pulled the canvas tighter. "My husband, Silas," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He was one of them, a wolf, but a weak one." Caleb turned, surprised by her sudden shift. He leaned against the wall, listening. "He did not marry me for love," she said, staring into the flames. "He married me because my father owed him $2,000 from a card game. My father, he was a fool. He gambled away our farm, our name, and I was the last thing he had to sell." Caleb said nothing. He just watched her. "I was his wife for 4 years, and in 4 years, he never once touched me with kindness. He was rough and cold. He blamed me for his bad luck, blamed me for the fact that Granger was smarter than him, and he blamed me for the baby." Her voice broke. She paused, swallowing. "It was a girl. She was born in the winter. Too early. She did not breathe. Not even once. Silas. He did not even come in the room. He was at the saloon. He said I was barren, cursed, that I could not even do the one thing a wife was supposed to do." She was weeping now, quiet, hopeless tears that traced paths on her face. "So you see," she whispered, "when I saw you, when you came back, I hated you. I hated you because you were free. You got to run. And I hated you because you looked at me. And I remembered. I remembered what it felt like to be a person. Before I was property." Caleb walked back to the fire and sat down. He put the branch back. He no longer felt the cold. He felt a slow, burning shame. "I ran," he said, his voice rough. "You are right. I was a coward. I was 22. I was scared of your father, scared of Silas, scared of the way I felt about you. I thought if I left, you would be better off, that you would marry some decent man. I did not know about the debt." "It would not have mattered," she said. "My father would have found a way." A long silence fell, filled only by the storm. "That night," Caleb said, his voice low, "in the barn, I never forgot it." "Do not," she whispered. "Do not talk about that. I have to—" He looked at her, his eyes meeting hers across the flames. "I ran from that, too. I ran from you, and I kept running." He told her about Texas, about the saloon in Laredo, the cattle baron's son, a cheat and a bully, the accusation, the fight. It was not a bar fight. It was an ambush. The man and his 2 cousins. Caleb had a chair. They had knives. One of them pulled a gun. Caleb got it away from him. The gun went off. He was dead. Caleb said, his voice hollow. "The Baron's son. His cousins told the marshal I murdered him in cold blood, that I robbed him. The Baron owns that whole county. He put a price on my head. $500, dead or alive. I've been looking over my shoulder for 6 years." He looked down at his scarred hands. "That is who I am. Clara, I am not a hero. I am not a savior. I am a $500 bounty. I am a drifter who is 1 step ahead of a rope. When I came back here, I just wanted work, a stake to get me to California. I never meant to drag you into this." He finally looked up. "You were right to tell me to go. I am poison. Granger will find this out. It is only a matter of time. And when he does, he will not just take your house. He will sell me to the law for the bounty. And he will tell everyone you were harboring a killer." The cabin was silent. The rain had softened, reduced to a steady, heavy drumming on the roof. The fire was warm. All the pretense was gone. There was no loose widow. There was no mysterious drifter. Just a man and a woman, stripped bare, their secrets and scars exposed in the firelight. Clara stared at him. She saw him, the scar on his face, the old wounds on his chest, the deeper wound he carried inside. He was not a monster. He was just as trapped as she was. She stood up, the canvas clutched in one hand. She walked to him, her bare feet silent on the dirt floor. She stood over him. He looked up at her, his face wary, expecting more anger, more accusations. She let the canvas fall. She stood before him, naked, her thin body illuminated by the fire. She was not ashamed. She was not afraid. She was just there. "Clara," he whispered. His voice choked. He made to stand, to cover her. She put her hand on his shoulder, stopping him. Her touch was light but firm. She looked into his eyes, a long, steady gaze that held no illusion, no artifice, only a raw, terrifying truth. "Take it off," she whispered. Her voice was not shaking. "Like before." He froze, his heart stopping in his chest. She held his gaze. "But this time, don't leave." The words broke the last dam inside him. He reached up, his hand trembling, and touched her face. His rough palm cupped her cheek. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. He stood, pulling her against his bare chest. Her skin was cold, but she was warm inside. He wrapped his arms around her, crushing her to him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair. It was not a kiss of passion, not at first. It was a kiss of recognition. It was a kiss that said, "I see you, I am broken, too." He kissed the salt of her tears, the weariness from her lips. Then the passion came, a desperate, sudden flood. It was not the fumbling, tender reunion of their first night. This was something else. This was a claiming. It was a defiant act against the storm, against Granger, against the past that was trying to kill them both. His hands were rough, urgent, mapping her body, pulling her impossibly closer. Her nails dug into his back, grounding him, holding him. He lifted her, his mouth never leaving hers, and carried her to the fire. He laid her on the canvas she had dropped, and he came down over her. They made love in the dirt, by the dying fire, in a ruined cabin, while a storm raged outside. It was desperate, and it was raw, and it was honest. It was a promise to be alive, a frantic assertion of life in the face of death. They clung to each other as if the dawn would bring the hangman, as if this was the last night, the only night they would ever have. And in the wreckage of both their lives, they found a small, fierce, and terrible peace. Their bodies tangled together, their hands clasped so tightly they ached, as the fire burned down to embers and the cabin grew cold around them. The gray light of dawn crept into the cabin like a sickness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cold, dripping world. The fire was a pile of gray ash, and the room was colder than the air outside. Caleb was already dressed. standing by the broken window, watching the steam rise from the wet pines. He had not slept. Clara stirred on the bunk, pulling the damp canvas ticking around her. Her clothes, stiff and still damp, were piled by the dead fireplace. She sat up, her body aching, her hair a wild, dark tangle. The raw, desperate energy of the night had evaporated, leaving an empty, brittle silence. They were alive. They were still trapped. "He will not stop," she said, her voice a dry rasp. "Those men, they will be back. Granger will send more." Caleb did not turn. "I know. We cannot stay here. We cannot go back to the house. We have nowhere to go." Her voice was flat, devoid of panic, a simple statement of fact. "I am done running. Clara," he said, his voice low. He turned from the window. His face was set, the lines around his eyes carved deep. The hunted look was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "You said Silas told you Granger tricked him, that the loan was a fraud." "He did. When he was drunk, he said he only borrowed a little. For a card game, not $400. He said Granger changed the paper. Then we prove it." Clara looked at him, uncomprehending. "Prove it? How? With what? It is his word against a dead man's. And my word is worth nothing in this town. A loan note like that, for land, it has to be filed," Caleb said, thinking aloud, piecing it together. "It is not just a piece of paper Granger keeps in his pocket. There has to be a copy, a record, filed with the county." "The courthouse? In town?" Hope flickered in her eyes, so faint it was painful. "Caleb, that place is Granger's. The judge, the sheriff, they are his—" "I am not talking about the main office. I am talking about the records, the old records." He walked over to the cold fireplace, his boots crunching on the dirt floor. "The old county clerk's office, the small brick building behind the assay. It is where they keep all the old filings, from before the new wing was built. It is just dust and ledgers. No one guards it. Not really. You want us to break in?" "I want you to get your house back," he said. He looked at her, his gaze steady. "He forged the note. I know he did. If Silas only borrowed $40, and the note says $400, the original ledger will show it. We find that book. We get that proof. And then what? Show it to Sheriff Bodie? He will laugh in our faces and arrest us." "We do not show it to Bodie," Caleb said. "We take it to the territorial marshal, the one that comes through on the circuit. He is not on Granger's payroll. He is the only law Granger is afraid of, but we need the proof first. Hard proof." The plan was insane. It was desperate. It was— They both knew. Their only chance. They waited all day. They ate nothing. They spoke little. Caleb took his knife and scraped a handful of half-green pine cones from a branch near the door, feeding them one by one into a tiny, smokeless fire to dry their clothes properly. The hours dragged. They were two fugitives, hiding in plain sight, a mile from the town that wanted them gone. When full dark fell, it was a moonless, starless night, the clouds still thick and low, a blessing. "Stay behind me," Caleb said, his voice a low murmur at the door. "Move when I move, stop when I stop, and do not make a sound." They slipped out of the cabin. Returning to Dustwood was harder than leaving it. Every shadow seemed to hold a man. Every scrape of a boot on rock sounded like a gunshot. Caleb moved with a fluid, animal grace, melting from shadow to shadow, his hand never far from his gun. Clara followed, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. They entered the town from the east, crossing the muddy, empty street like ghosts. They reached the alley behind the assay office. The old records building was a dark, squat cube of brick, its windows blind with dust. Caleb put his back to the wall, listening. He heard the tinny piano from the saloon. 2 blocks away, he heard a dog bark. Far off. Nothing else. He went to the rear window. It was painted shut, the wood swollen. He did not try to force it. He took his knife, the blade thin and strong, and worked it patiently around the sash, cutting the old paint, loosening the wood. It took 10 minutes, an agony of scraping, silent work. Finally, the window gave, lifting with a low, groaning squeak. Caleb froze. They waited. Nothing. He put his hands on the sill and vaulted inside. Landing in a silent crouch, he reached back, his hand finding hers, and helped her through. The air inside was thick, cold, and dead. It was the smell of paper decay, mouse droppings, and forgotten time. Caleb struck a single match, using it to light a small candle stub. He pulled from his pocket. He shielded the tiny flame with his hand, creating a small, weak pool of light. They were in a tomb of paper. Shelves lined every wall, floor to ceiling, sagging under the weight of thick, leather-bound ledgers and countless dusty boxes tied with rotting string. "What year?" Caleb whispered. Silas took the loan. It was the spring, 3 years ago, 1871. They separated, moving down the narrow aisles, their shoulders brushing the shelves. The candle flame danced, throwing their shadows up like giants on the walls. Clara ran her fingers along the spines of the ledgers, her touch hesitant, as if she might wake the dead. Deeds, tax rolls, mining claims. Caleb was at the other end. 73, 74, 2 new. "Here," Clara whispered, her voice sharp. "Ledgers, county filings, 1870 through 72. She pulled the heavy book from the shelf, a cloud of dust exploding, making her cough. She smothered the sound against her sleeve. She laid the book on a small, cluttered desk. Caleb brought the candle. Her fingers, stained with grime, trembled as she turned the thick, brittle pages. The handwriting was an elegant, faded copperplate. The silence was absolute. "Here," she breathed, her finger landing on a line. "Thorne, Silas, April 14th, 1871. Loan against property. Lot 22. Caleb leaned closer, holding the candle steady. His eyes traced the line. Lender, H. Granger. Amount. He squinted. The ink was faded. $40. His heart hammered. 40, not 400. He added a zero, or he wrote a new note and filed this one away, betting no one would ever look. "We have it," Clara whispered, a tear of relief cutting a clean path through the dust on her cheek. "Caleb, we have the proof." "Wait." Caleb held up a hand. He had heard it, a sound from outside, the scrape of a boot on the gravel in the alley. He snuffed the candle flame with his fingers, plunging the room into total, suffocating blackness. He grabbed Clara, pulling her down behind the desk. His arm clamped around her waist. He drew his pistol, the click of the hammer being pulled back seeming to echo like a cannon shot in the small room. "Saw a light," a man's voice growled, right outside the window. "Swear to God, lanky, saw it flash." "You are seeing things." Another voice, the one Caleb recognized from the fight, whined. "It is just the rain. Let's get back to the saloon. I am freezing." "Granger'll have our hides if he finds out we left the house. He wants that drifter. He wants the woman. Now, shut up and check the door." Caleb felt Clara trembling against him. He put his lips to her ear. "Do not move. Do not breathe." They heard the rattle of the front door handle. It was locked. "See? Nothing. Let's go." A long moment of silence. Caleb's muscles ached, coiled, ready. "Fine," the first man grunted. "But I am telling Granger we checked this whole block." Their footsteps crunched away, fading down the alley. Caleb waited a full minute, his body rigid, listening. He let out his breath, slow. He put his hand on Clara's shoulder. "It is clear." He lit the candle again. "We cannot take the book. It is too big. They will know." "What then?" "Your husband's signature. Is it on the note Granger has?" "Yes, he was proud of his signature." "Then we find the original note." Caleb moved to a set of tall, thin drawers labeled with the same years. He pulled one open. It was full of folded documents. April 1871. He riffled through them, his movements fast but careful. "Thorne, Silas." He pulled it out, a single folded page. He opened it. There it was, a promissory note, clearly written, $40, and at the bottom, Silas Thorne's looping, arrogant signature. "This is it," Caleb said. He folded the paper and tucked it deep inside his shirt. "This is what we came for." "Let's go," Clara urged, already moving to the window. They were halfway out, Caleb on the ground, helping Clara as she swung her legs over the sill, when the alley erupted in light. "There!" a shout. Lanky and his partner were at the end of the alley, holding lanterns. They had not left. They had waited. "Run!" Caleb yelled. He grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her. They sprinted, abandoning all pretense of stealth. A gunshot exploded, the bullet whining off the brick wall beside them. They burst out of the alley and ran across the main street, a street no longer empty. Two more of Granger's men, drawn by the shot, were riding in from the direction of the saloon. "Cut them off!" "They are heading for the hills." Caleb did not hesitate. He ran straight for the steep, rocky slope that rose up behind the town. It was their only way. He knew the town was a death trap. They scrambled up the first embankment, mud and loose rock giving way under their feet. Clara was surprisingly fast, fueled by terror, her skirts hitched up in one hand. "Do not look back!" Caleb yelled, pushing her ahead of him. Another shot. This one was closer. It kicked up dirt just to her left. She screamed, a short, sharp cry, and stumbled, falling to her knees. "Clara, get up!" Caleb grabbed her arm to haul her to her feet. "I cannot," she gasped, her face white. "Caleb, my leg." He looked down. In the dim light from the lanterns below, he saw the dark stain spreading rapidly across the pale fabric of her dress, just below the knee. "Oh God," he breathed. Rage, cold and pure, surged through him. He turned, raised his pistol, and fired 2 shots back down the hill, aiming not to kill, but to make them take cover. The men ducked. "He is armed!" "Go! Go!" he roared. Turning back to Clara, he scooped her up, his arms locking under her back and knees. She was light, too light, like a child. He began to climb, carrying her, his boots digging for purchase on the treacherous slope. He was strong, but the climb was brutal. He slipped, his knee slamming into a sharp rock, but he did not stop. He could hear them below, crashing through the brush, following. The rain started again. Not a deluge, but a cold, steady, miserable drizzle that slicked the rocks and turned the world into a gray, featureless gloom. It was a blessing. It would hide their tracks. "Put me down," Clara whispered, her voice tight with pain. "I am slowing you. You can get away." "Shut up," he grunted, shifting her weight. "I am not leaving you. Not this time." He pushed on, his lungs burning, his muscles screaming. He left the main path, cutting sideways across the mountain, heading for a place he had seen days before, a dark scar in the rock face. He found it, a narrow cleft in the stone, hidden behind a curtain of stringy, wet cedar. He pushed through the branches. It was not much, a shallow overhang, barely deep enough to be called a cave, but it was dry. The floor was covered in sand and rock debris. He laid her down gently in the deepest part, as far from the opening as possible. He ripped a piece of her petticoat and pressed it hard against the wound on her calf. "Keep pressure on that." He crept back to the entrance. He could hear them, 30 or 40 yards below, spread out, searching. See anything? Nothing. This rain is washing everything away. How'd he just vanish? He is up here, somewhere. We will wait. Come daylight, we will find them. Caleb slipped back into the darkness of the cave. They were trapped. He sat beside Clara, his back to the cold stone, his pistol in his hand, and he began the long wait for morning. The rain did not stop. It fell all night, a steady, monotonous drumming. It fell all the next day. They were prisoners of the weather. A cold, wet siege. On the first morning, Caleb checked her wound. He had matches, and he built a tiny, smokeless fire, using dry sticks from a pack rat's nest deep in the cave. The fire was pitiful, but it was light. He ripped open her stocking. The bullet had gone clean through the thickest part of her calf. It was a jagged, ugly tear, bleeding sluggishly, but it had missed the bone. She had been lucky. "This will hurt," he said, his voice flat. He took the small metal flask from his coat. "What is it?" "Whiskey." He uncorked it. "I thought you were going to drink it." "I am—" He took a short, sharp swallow himself. Then, before she could tense, he poured the rest of the liquor directly into the open wound. Clara screamed, a raw, strangled sound that she bit back with a gasp. Her whole body arched in agony. He held her legs steady, his grip like iron. "I know," he whispered, his voice rough. "I know." He took his own undershirt, which was cleaner than her dress, and tore it into strips, bandaging the wound tightly. When it was done, she was pale, sweating, and trembling, but the bleeding had stopped. He put his coat over her. He sat, his arms on his knees, and resumed his watch. They had no food. They had only the small, hidden fire and the sound of the rain. For 2 days, they existed in that cave. The world was reduced to cold stone, the smell of damp wool, and the low, flickering fire. On the second night, the silence stretched, broken only by the drip of water. "You will get away," she said, her voice thin in the darkness. When they find me." "They are not finding you," he said, his voice a low growl. "We rest. When this rain stops and your leg is better, we walk out of here. We go east to the next county. We find that marshal." "You talk like it is simple." "It is the only thing it can be." She was quiet for a long time. The firelight danced on her face. "A dress shop," she said, so quietly he barely heard her. "What?" "That is what I wanted, before Silas." She was staring into the flames, her eyes distant. "A little shop, in a town, a real town, not this one, a place with a clean street. I am good with a needle. I would have made dresses, bonnets, for ladies, real ladies." She looked at him, a small, shy smile touching her lips, a ghost of the girl she had been. "I would have had a bell over the door, a little bell, so it would jingle when customers came in. And I would have had bolts of cloth, blue velvet and yellow silk, all the colors. I would have made my own money. I would have been Clara." Caleb watched her, his heart aching. Such a small dream, and it seemed as impossible as reaching the moon. "What about you, Caleb?" she asked, her voice soft. "What is your dream? California?" He shook his head, staring at his scarred hands. "California is just a place to run to. I am tired of running. I just want peace. A place where I can stop looking over my shoulder. A place that is quiet." "A ranch?" "No, not a ranch. Just some land, a few acres, in a valley, with water, enough to keep a horse. Maybe 2. He permitted himself a small, rough smile. "A small cabin, one I built right, with a roof that does not leak. I would have a dog, and I would sit on the porch, and I would just be. That is all. Just be." They looked at each other, their 2 small, broken dreams hanging in the air between them. Clara's smile faded. Her eyes filled with tears. "We are fools, are we not, to talk of such things?" "Why?" "Because I do not deserve it," she whispered, the words tearing from her. "I do not deserve a shop. I do not deserve happiness. I am being punished." "Punished? For what? For being married to a brute? For being smarter than Granger?" "No." She shook her head, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "For my baby. For my little girl. I lost her. I lost her because I was wicked. I did not love Silas. I hated him. And that night in the barn, with you, I wanted it. I was a bad woman. And God took my baby to punish me for it. I know it. I have always known it. I am not worthy of happiness. I am worthy of this, of Granger, of Allie's, of being shot in the mud." She was sobbing now, the quiet, hopeless sobs he had heard before. Caleb's throat closed. He moved, shifting across the hard ground until he was beside her. He did not touch her. Not yet. "Clara," he said, his voice thick. "Look at me." She turned her tear-streaked face to him. "That night in the barn," he said, his voice rough. "It was not wicked. It was the only clean thing that ever happened to me. You were not wicked. You were alive. And what happened with your baby? That was not God. That was Winter. That was bad luck. That was Silas not being man enough to care for you. It was not a punishment. It was just the world. The world is hard, and it breaks things. It breaks people. But it does not mean you are not worthy." He reached out and, with a clumsy, calloused thumb, he wiped a tear from her cheek. "You are the strongest person I have ever known," he said. "You have survived. That is not a curse. That is a miracle." She looked at him, her green eyes searching his. She saw no pity. She saw no judgment. She saw only a man as broken as she was, telling her a truth she had been too afraid to believe. He leaned in, his face close to hers. "If I could be with you," he whispered, his voice cracking, "even just in a dream, in your dream, with the dress shop, or in mine, with the quiet land, then that dream would be worth living." She stared at him, her breath catching. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic coupling of the trapper's cabin. It was not the clumsy, fearful kiss in her cold house. This was something new. It was slow. It was deep. It was a promise. It was two broken souls agreeing to be whole, together. Her hand came up to his cheek, the one with the scar, and her fingers traced it. Not in pity, but in recognition. He was real. This was real. He gently pushed the coat aside. He lowered his head and kissed the hollow of her throat. She arched against him, a low sound in her chest. There, in a cold cave, on a hard stone floor, with an army of enemies waiting outside, they came together. They moved with a slow, desperate tenderness, their bodies relearning each other, their hands mapping the scars, the wounds, the pain. It was an act of profound, reckless, beautiful defiance. It was a vow. They were not hiding from the world. They were creating their own, here, in the dark, by a dying fire. They were not two separate, broken people anymore. They were one. And as the rain finally began to soften outside, they held each other, their hands clasped, the precious folded document safe in the coat beneath their heads. And for the first time in their lives, they were not alone. The rain broke before dawn, leaving the air sharp and clean. The world washed new. They waited until the first gray light touched the rocks, a sign that Granger's men, cold, wet, and defeated, would be slinking back to town for whiskey and warmth. "He will not have it," Caleb said. He was inspecting the bandage on Clara's leg. The bleeding had stopped, and the skin, though angry and purple, was not hot to the touch. "He will not win." He had the note, the single folded piece of paper. tucked inside his shirt, a warm, crackling square against his skin. It was everything. It was her home. It was his redemption. "We cannot go to the marshal," Clara said, her voice practical, her ordeal in the cave having burned away her fear, leaving a hard, clear resolve. "He is not due for another 2 weeks. By then, Granger will own the town, and we will be dead." "I know." Caleb tied the bandage, his fingers surprisingly gentle. He had a plan. It was a thin, desperate plan, but it was not built on violence. It was built on the law. "There is one other man in this town who hates Granger." "Who? Everyone is on his payroll or terrified of him." "Phineas Cole," Caleb said. "The lawyer." Clara looked at him. "Cole? He is a snake. He argues water rights and land claims. He takes money from anyone." "Exactly," Caleb said. "He is not Granger's man. He is money's man. And he hates Granger because Granger does not use him. Granger uses the sheriff and his own thugs. He cuts Cole out. Cole is ambitious and he is smart. And more than anything, he respects the law, because the law is how he gets rich. He will not be able to ignore a forged legal document." He helped her to her feet. She put her weight on the bad leg and winced, but she did not complain. They were a ragged pair, covered in mud and pine needles, his knuckles raw, her dress torn, but their eyes were clear. They had been to the bottom and had started to climb. The walk back to Dustwood was a descent into hell. They were weak from hunger, and Clara's leg made their progress agonizingly slow. Caleb half carried, half dragged her down the slick, muddy slopes. Every shadow was an enemy. Every snap of a twig was a gunshot. But the town, when they reached its edges, was quiet, sleeping off the storm. Phineas Cole's office was a small, neat, clapboard building near the new end of the street, wedged between the bank and the dressmaker's shop that had been boarded up for a year. A brass plaque, polished bright, read P. Cole, ESQ, attorney at law. "Wait here," Caleb said, easing Clara into the narrow, dark alley between the buildings. "Stay out of sight. If I am not back in 10 minutes, you take this." He tried to give her the note. She pushed his hand away. "No, you take it. You show him. He has to see it. He has to." Her faith in the paper was absolute. "I will be right here. Go." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. He tucked the note back into his shirt. He walked to the front door, his hand on his gun, and knocked. After a long moment, the door opened a crack. A thin, pale man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a nervous tick in his eye peered out. It was Cole. He was already in his suit, his starched collar perfect, even at this hour. "We are not open," he began. Caleb pushed the door open and stepped inside, forcing the lawyer to stumble backward. "My name is Caleb," he said, his voice low. "You are going to listen to me, and you are going to help me." The office was neat, lined with books. It smelled of ink and leather and money. Cole, his face white with alarm, backed away until he was behind his large, mahogany desk. "This is breaking and entering. I will call the sheriff." "Go ahead," Caleb said. "Call Buddy, and when he gets here, I will show him this." He took the note from his shirt and unfolded it, laying it on the desk. Cole's eyes snapped down to the paper. His nervous tick stopped. He leaned forward, his thin nose almost touching the desk. He read the note. He read the signatures. He looked at the amount, clearly written, $40. "Thorn," he whispered. He looked up at Caleb, his eyes no longer frightened, but sharp, glittering with a sudden, greedy intelligence. "This is the original, from the county records." "It is," Caleb said. "And Harlan Granger is using a forged version of this document, claiming $400 to steal a widow's house. His men shot her last night when we took this." Cole stood up. He walked to the window, his back to Caleb. He seemed to be vibrating with a nervous energy. $400, He filed a false claim. That is fraud. That is a territorial offense. A federal offense. I know what it is, Caleb said. I want you to stop him. You are the law. I am, Cole said, his voice stronger. He turned around. His face was pale, but he was smiling, a thin, reptilian smile. I am, and this changes everything. Granger has gone too far. He has become sloppy. He thinks he is untouchable. So you will help? Caleb asked, wary of the man's sudden enthusiasm. Help? Cole laughed, a dry, reedy sound. Mr. Caleb, I am going to destroy him. This is the leverage I have needed for years. But we must be smart. We cannot just go to Bodie. We must present this to the judge, formally. But I need to prepare. I need to consult the statutes. This has to be perfect. Airtight. He was pacing now, his mind working fast. You must wait. You are in danger. Granger's men are looking for you. You cannot be seen. I can take care of myself, Caleb said. No, you are the key. You and this note. Cole pointed to a small door behind his desk. My file room. It is windowless. Wait in there. Do not make a sound. I must go to the courthouse. Just for an hour. I need to pull the forged filing Granger submitted. We must have both documents. Do not leave. Do not speak. When I return, we will have him. Caleb hesitated. It felt wrong. It felt too easy. Please, Cole urged, his eyes wide. Trust me. This is our only chance to do this legally. To make it stick. Give me 1 hour. Caleb looked at the man. He was a snake. Clara had said, but he was a snake who seemed to be pointed at Granger. Caleb needed the law on his side. He had lived outside it for too long. 1 hour, Caleb said. He walked into the small, dark file room. It was tiny, smelling of dust, just as the records office had. Cole smiled. I will lock you in, for your own safety. No one will know you are here. He pulled the heavy door shut. Caleb heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. He was in total darkness. A prisoner. But he had the note in his hand. He had the proof. He would wait. He waited. He heard Cole leave the office. He heard the jingle of the bell on the front door. He leaned against the shelves. He thought of Clara, hiding in the alley, cold and in pain. He thought of her dress shop, of his quiet land. It was all tied to this small, dark room, to this weaselly lawyer. The hour passed. It felt like a year. He heard the front door of the office open again. He heard heavy boots, not Cole's light, quick step. He stood up, his hand going to his gun. Cole, he called. He heard a low chuckle. Then the key turned in the lock. The door was flung open, blinding him with the morning light. It was not Phineas Cole. It was Sheriff Bodie, his face pale and triumphant. And beside him stood 2 men Caleb had never seen. They were tall, wore clean dusters, and had hard, unforgiving eyes. Polished silver badges were pinned to their coats. Caleb, Bodie said, his voice shaking with false bravado. You are under arrest. On what charge? Body? Caleb said, his eyes on the 2 strangers. He was trapped. The file room was a coffin. Not on my charge, Bodie said, stepping back. The first stranger stepped into the doorway. His eyes were the color of ice. Caleb Stone, he said, his voice a flat Texas drawl. My name is Marshall King. These are the Texas Rangers. You are under arrest by authority of the state of Texas for the murder of Elias Vance, 6 years ago. Caleb's blood ran cold. Stone, his real name. No one knew that name here. It is a trap, he whispered. He looked past them, into the office. Phineas Cole was standing by his desk, his face ashen, his hands shaking, and sitting in Cole's own client chair, one leg crossed over the other, was Harlan Granger. He was smoking a cigar, a look of immense, satisfied amusement on his face. You see, Drifter, Granger said, exhaling a cloud of blue smoke. I do my homework. After you made a fool of my men, I sent a telegraph to the marshal in Laredo. I described you, a man with a scar, fast with his hands, answering to Caleb. Took them a week, but they found you, Caleb Stone, a $500 bounty, murder." "It was self-defense," Caleb said, his voice hollow. "That is what they all say," Marshal King said, stepping forward, his gun drawn. "Hands up, slow." "You set this up," Caleb said, looking at Cole. The lawyer would not meet his eyes. "Mr. Cole is a law-abiding citizen," Granger smiled. "When he heard I was expecting the Rangers to arrive on this morning's stage, he promised to let me know if a wanted murderer happened to walk into his office. He did his civic duty, and, of course, he will be collecting a small portion of the reward." Body snatched Caleb's pistol. The other ranger pulled his arms behind his back and clamped the cold, heavy iron of manacles onto his wrists. "And the note?" Caleb said, as they dragged him out of the file room. "Ah, the note," Granger said. He plucked the folded paper from Caleb's shirt pocket. He held it up. "Evidence of your criminal trespass." He smiled, then held the note over the lit candle on Cole's desk. The paper browned, curled, and burst into flame. Caleb lunged, roaring, but the two rangers held him fast. He watched as the paper, her hope, her house, his one piece of proof, turned to black, floating ash. "No!" A scream came from the street. Clara. She had seen it. She had seen him taken. She stood in the mouth of the alley, her hand at her throat, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. "Get her!" Granger barked. Body ran out. Caleb fought, a wild, desperate animal. But the Rangers were professionals. They dragged him out the door, into the street. Clara turned and fled, limping, disappearing back into the maze of alleys. Body, too slow, came back, panting. "Let her go," Granger said magnanimously, stepping onto the boardwalk. The town was waking up. People were stopping, watching. She is just a hysterical woman. The real criminal is here. They dragged Caleb down the street, through the gathering crowd, and threw him into the single, filthy cell at the back of the sheriff's office. The iron door slammed shut, a sound of absolute finality. Clara ran. She ran until her wounded leg gave out, and she collapsed behind the livery, sobbing in a pile of wet, rotting hay. It was over. He was gone. The proof was gone. Granger had won. He had won everything. She hid all day. She heard the town buzzing. The news was everywhere. The drifter was a killer, a wanted murderer from Texas. The Rangers were holding an extradition hearing tomorrow, just a formality. And then he would be gone, taken back to Texas to hang. And the other news? Harlan Granger, in an act of Christian charity, had announced to the town that in light of the great evil that had befallen Mrs. Thorne, in light of her having been led astray by a hardened criminal, he was forgiving her debt. He would not, he said, turn a grieving, foolish woman out of her home. He was a benefactor, a pillar of the community. Clara lay in the hay, the world spinning. He was offering her a choice. Silence. He would let her keep the house. She would be safe, despised, pitied, the town's fool, but she would have a roof over her head. All she had to do was nothing. Let them take Caleb. Let him hang for a crime he did not commit. She wept. She wept for him, for herself, for the baby she had lost, for the dream of the dress shop. She thought of his words in the cave. "You are worthy." Was she? Was she worthy of a quiet life? If she bought it with his blood. Night fell. She was cold. She was starving. Her leg was a throbbing fire. She crawled out of the hay. She could not go to her house. It was hers, but it was not her home. Not anymore. It was a cage. She limped back to the one place that felt real, the trapper's cabin. She huddled inside, in the dark, her mind a storm. He had run from her once, to save himself. Now, she had to choose. Run from him. To save herself? Or stand. But stand with what? She had no proof. She had no allies. She had only her voice. And her voice was worthless. She sat in the dark until the first gray light touched the broken door. And she knew what she had to do. The hearing was held in the saloon. It was the biggest room in town. It was packed. Every merchant, every miner, every sour-faced wife was there, crammed onto benches, standing along the walls. It was a spectacle. Granger sat in the front row, his hands piously folded, looking grave. Sheriff Bodie looked important. Phineas Cole was there, near the back, looking pale and trying to seem invisible. At a small table at the front sat Caleb. He was in chains. His face was bruised from the arrest, his eyes hollow. He looked like he had already been hanged. He stared at the floor. Beside him sat the 2 Texas Rangers, their faces impassive. A circuit judge, a man who owed his position to Granger, was rattling through the legal language. And the warrant from the state of Texas being in order, and the prisoner identified. This court sees no reason to delay the extradition of Caleb Stone to face justice. Wait. The single word cut through the room. The saloon doors at the back swung open. Clara stood in the doorway. The entire room went silent. Every head turned. She was a vision from a nightmare. Her dress was ripped, covered in mud and hay. Her hair was a wild tangle around her face. Her left stocking was soaked in dried blood. She was limping, leaning on a branch she used as a crutch, but her eyes were on fire. Caleb's head snapped up. His eyes met hers. His face, dead a moment before, came alive. "Clara, no," he breathed. "Mrs. Thorne," the judge said, rapping his gavel. "This is a closed proceeding. It does not concern you." "It concerns me," Clara said, her voice shaking but carrying through the room. She began to walk, or rather, limp, down the central aisle. The crowd parted for her, as if afraid to touch her. "Sheriff, remove her," Granger ordered, his voice a low growl. Bodie moved to intercept her. "Now, Mrs. Thorne, you do not want to make trouble." "I have something to say," she cried, shoving his hand away. "You will listen to me." "She has no standing," Granger said to the judge. "She has standing as a witness to a conspiracy to commit fraud," Phineas Cole shouted from the back. The lawyer was on his feet, his face slick with sweat, but he had found some scrap of a spine. "This entire arrest is a sham, a fabrication by that man, Harlan Granger, to silence a witness to his crimes." The saloon erupted. Granger was on his feet, his face purple. "That is a lie! Slander!" The judge pounded his gavel. "Order! Order! Mr. Cole! You are in contempt!" But the lead Texas Ranger, Marshal King, stood up. He was not looking at the judge. He was looking at Granger, and then at Clara. He held up a hand. The room quieted. "Let her speak," King said, his Texas drawl cutting through the noise. "I have a feeling we have not heard the whole story." The judge, seeing the Ranger's cold expression, sputtered and sat down. Clara stood in the open space in front of the judge's table. She was shaking, but she stood tall. She looked at the crowd, at Mrs. Mulligan, sneering, at other women, their faces hard, and at a few, in the back, who looked sympathetic. "You all know me," she said, her voice clear. "I am Clara Thorne, the loose widow, the drifter's woman. My word is worth nothing in this town." She turned to Granger. "That man, Harlan Granger, he holds a note for a debt my husband owed. He told you all he was forgiving it, out of charity. He did not tell you the note was a lie. He did not tell you my husband borrowed $40, and he forged it to read 400. And he did not tell you that he burned the proof, the original note, this morning." Cole shouted, "I saw him do it. I am an officer of the court. He burned evidence." The crowd gasped. "And he did not tell you," Clara continued, her voice rising, that he offered to forget this debt weeks ago if I would be neighborly. A wave of shocked murmurs. He wanted to buy my body, Clara said, her voice ringing. And when I refused, he tried to steal my home. He sent men to shoot at me. This wound, she pointed to her bloody leg, is from one of his men. He tried to have us killed. She turned and pointed at Caleb. And this man, Caleb Stone, he is wanted for a murder in Texas. I do not know what happened in Texas. I was not there. But I know what happened here. This man, this drifter, he protected me. He bought me flour when this town, your town, tried to starve me. He chopped my wood. He fixed my roof. He fought for me. And he is the only man in Dustwood who did not try to take anything from me. She was crying now, tears of rage and pain, but she did not stop. She looked at the women in the crowd. He is the only man who, when I was on my knees, begging for a reason to live, did not touch me unless I truly, truly wanted him to. He did not see a loose widow. He saw a woman. He is not a killer. He is a good man. And you, she whirled on Granger, you are the liar. You are the thief. You are the one who should be in chains. Silence. A total, stunned silence. Caleb was on his feet, the chains rattling. He was staring at her, his face a mask of awe and love. Marshal King looked at Granger. The ranger's face was unreadable, but his hand was on his gun. He looked at Cole. Mr. Cole, is what she says true? You saw him burn the note? Cole, trembling, nodded. Yes, the original note, $40. He burned it. King looked at Granger. Mr. Granger, you used an official telegraph to summon the Texas Rangers on a false pretense. You have used us as your personal bounty hunters in a land dispute. You have tampered with evidence. You have, by all accounts, committed massive fraud. Granger was pale. His bluff called, This is a conspiracy, a hysterical woman and a crooked lawyer. We will see. King said. He nodded to his partner. The second ranger walked over to Caleb and, with a key, unlocked his manacles. Caleb stood there, rubbing his wrists, dazed. This warrant from Texas is now suspect, King said, his voice cold. It seems Mr. Stone here was the target of a very powerful man. This new evidence, it changes things. We will be filing a full report with the territorial governor. And Mr. Granger, I suggest you find a very good lawyer, one who is not in this room. Granger, defeated, his face a mask of pure hatred, turned and pushed his way through the crowd, which parted for him as if he were a leper. Caleb was free. He walked, his legs unsteady, to Clara. The crowd was melting away, the people whispering, ashamed, excited, frightened. Caleb and Clara just stood in the middle of the saloon, looking at each other. He reached out and touched her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. He had no words. She leaned into his hand, her eyes closing. That night, they were in her house. It was not a celebration. They were packing. They had to leave. Granger was still free, and he was dangerous. The town, fickle, had turned on him, but it had not turned to them. They were still outcasts. Just a few things, she said, folding an old dress into a saddlebag. My mother's locket, some thread. We will get more, Caleb said. He was standing by the window, watching the street. We will get that silk for your shop. She smiled, a small, tired smile. That is when he smelled it. Wood smoke, sharp, acrid, too close. Caleb, he said, his voice tense. He turned. Through the thin curtain, he saw a flicker, an orange light, dancing. He burst out the front door. The back of the house was in flames. A thick, oily smoke poured into the night sky. Someone had crept up in the dark and thrown a torch. No, Clara whispered, coming up behind him. He ran for the water barrel, but it was already too late. The old, dry wood of the house went up like tinder. The fire was roaring, devouring the dry shingles, the leaning walls. The fire bell started to ring, a frantic, useless clanging. People came out of their houses. They stood in the street, shadows against the blaze. They watched. No one brought a bucket. Clara sank to her knees in the dusty street. She did not cry. She just watched, her face illuminated by the fire, all her possessions, her past, her memories, turning to ash. Granger had lost the battle, but he had fired the last shot. Caleb stood beside her. He did not look at the fire. He looked at the townspeople, watching them, their faces pale and impassive in the night. He put his hand on Clara's shoulder. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. They knelt there, two figures in the dirt, as the roof fell in with a great, whooshing roar, sending a shower of sparks up to the indifferent stars. Her house was gone. She had nothing left. She had only him. The fire burned hot all night. By the time the first weak light of dawn touched the prairie, the house was gone. All that remained was a perfect black rectangle of smoking timbers and a single, defiant chimney standing like a tombstone against the gray sky. The air, washed clean by the rain, was now thick with the smell of wet ash and finality. The crowd had dispersed hours ago. They had watched the spectacle, their faces pale and impassive in the firelight, and then, one by one, had returned to their beds, leaving the two of them alone in the street. Clara had not moved. She no longer knelt. She sat in the dirt of the road, her legs drawn up, her arms wrapped around her knees. She was covered in a fine layer of soot and ash, and the morning dew was turning it to a gray paste on her skin. She stared at the spot where her front door had been. She was empty. The fire had taken her past, her shame, her home, her one small locket. It had burned away everything. Caleb had stood watch all night, his back to her, his gaze sweeping the dark alleys and rooftops. He expected Granger's men to return, to finish the job. But the night remained quiet. The arson had been an act of public execution, a final, brutal message. Granger did not need to kill them. He had already erased them. As the sun, a weak, watery eye, cleared the horizon, Caleb finally turned. He walked to her. His boots were silent in the thick layer of ash that coated the street. He did not say he was sorry. He did not say they had to go. There were no words left for any of that. He simply sat down in the dirt beside her. They sat in silence for a long time. The town began to wake around them. A door slammed. A wagon rattled on the next street over. A man coughed. No one came near them. They were phantoms, sitting in the graveyard of their own life. "He took it all," Clara whispered. Her voice was not a cry. It was a dry, rasping statement of fact. There is not even a spoon left, not even a memory. Caleb said nothing. He looked at the smoking ruin. He looked at the hard, indifferent line of the mountains to the north. He looked at her. Finally, he held out his hand, his right hand, the one with the broken, scarred knuckles. It was black with soot. He held it, palm up, in the cold, gray space between them. It was not a request, it was an offer, an anchor. Clara's gaze slowly moved from the ashes. She looked at his hand. It was a killer's hand, a worker's hand. It was the hand that had split her wood, fixed her roof, and touched her face in the dark. It was the only real thing left in the world. She hesitated. Then she slowly lifted her own hand. It was shaking. She placed it in his. His fingers closed around hers. The grip was not tight, but it was solid. It was absolute. He stood, pulling her to her feet. She was stiff, her body aching, her wounded leg a throb scream. She stumbled against him, and he took her weight. "There is nothing here," he said, his voice low. He turned her, gently but firmly, away from the ruin. "Do not look back." He led her down the street, half carrying her as she limped. They were a ragged, spectral pair, covered in the ashes of their old life. They passed the general store. Mrs. Mulligan was outside, sweeping her boardwalk. She took one look at them, at their joined hands, at their sooty faces, and she hurried back inside, the bell on her door tinkling in the quiet. They reached the livery. Caleb eased Clara down to sit on the edge of the water trough. "Wait here." He walked inside. Old Jedediah was there, his back to the door, nervously forking hay. "I am taking my horse," Caleb said. Jedediah jumped, startled, and turned. His milky eyes were wide with fear. "Mr. Caleb, I heard, I saw. It was a terrible thing." "It was," Caleb said. He walked to the bay's stall and pulled his saddle roll. He began to saddle the horse, his movements economical, efficient. I cannot let you take him," Jedediah whispered, wringing his hands. "Mr. Granger, he said if I help you, he will burn me out, too." Caleb stopped. He did not look at the old man. He just rested his hand on the saddle. "I am not asking to be helped. Jedediah, I am taking my horse. You can try and stop me." The old man looked at Caleb's back. He looked at the gun on his hip. He looked at the ruin down the street. He swallowed. Hard. He is a good horse. He likes a little grain in the morning." He turned and went back to forking the hay, his movements quick and panicked. Caleb finished. He led the bay out into the street. He looked at Clara, her small, worn-out frame perched on the trough. He looked at her leg. He looked at the vast, open country stretching south. They would not last a day. He made his decision. He looked north, to the high, cold, rocky spine of the mountains, the place they had hidden. "We need another horse," he said. Clara's eyes widened. "Caleb, we have no money. Your coins." "I know." He looped the bay's reins over the trough rail. He walked past her, back toward the center of town. "What are you doing?" she cried, trying to stand. "Payment," he said, his voice flat. He did not walk to the public stable. He walked straight to the large, freshly painted stable at the end of the main street, the one with Granger's brand burned into the sign above the door. "Caleb, no," she whispered, limping after him. "That is stealing. They will hang you. A horse thief is worse than a killer." "He burned her house," Caleb said, as if to the air. "I am taking his horse." He did not kick the door. He just opened it and walked in. 2 of Granger's men were inside, drinking coffee by a small stove. They had not been part of the fire. They were the day shift. They looked up, saw him, and scrambled to their feet, their hands dropping to their guns. Caleb stood in the doorway. The light from the street silhouetted him. He did not draw his pistol. He just looked at them. "I am taking one horse," he said, his voice a low, cold rumble. "You can have your coffee, or you can try and stop me. Your choice." The 2 men looked at each other. They had been in the saloon. They had seen the Texas Rangers let him go. They had seen his face when he fought. They were paid to bully, not to die for a horse. Slowly, their hands moved away from their guns. Caleb walked down the line of stalls. He passed Granger's fine black stallion. He passed a nervous-looking mare. He stopped at a sturdy, dun-colored gelding with a calm eye and strong legs. This one. He found a good, plain saddle, not Granger's silver-studded one. He bridled the horse. He found a spare canteen and filled it from the stable pump. He found a sack and filled it with oats. He worked with a calm, deliberate speed. He was not stealing. He was provisioning. He led the dun horse out into the street. The 2 men had not moved. He walked back to Clara. She was staring at him, her face a mask of terror and awe. He tied the canteen and the sack of oats to the mare's saddle. He bent down, cupped his hands, and lifted her easily into the seat. She winced as her bad legs settled. He mounted his bay. He looked at the town of Dustwood. The sun was fully up now, Windows were opening, faces peered out, watching the two of them, the man and the woman, covered in ash, sitting on two horses, one of which belonged to the most powerful man in the county. Caleb looked at Clara. She met his gaze. She was terrified, but she sat up straight in the saddle. He turned his horse. He did not lead them south, to the open plains. He did not lead them west, toward the dream of California. He turned his horse north, toward the high, cold sanctuary of the mountains. Together, they rode out of town. They did not look back. They rode for 2 days, pushing deep into the high country, following the stream up the narrow, wooded canyon where they had first hidden. The air was sharp and thin, and the world was quiet, filled only with the sound of rushing water and the cry of a hawk. They were not running. They were vanishing. He found the spot, the small, level clearing by the water, sheltered by a high wall of granite. "Here," he said. They had nothing. 2 horses, his bedroll, his axe, the clothes on their backs, and her small, precious needle and thread, which she had kept in her pocket. They started with nothing. For the first week, they lived on the edge of starvation. Caleb set snares, catching 3 rabbits. He used his rifle only once, to bring down a young deer, the single shot echoing like thunder through the canyon. They both froze, listening for an hour, but no one came. He built the shelter. He did not call it a cabin. It was a lean-to, a half-faced camp, built against the granite wall. He felled young pines, notching them with his axe, building a single, sloping roof. He chinked the gaps with mud and moss. He built a stone fireplace at one end, the chimney drawing clear. It was crude, small, and dark, but the roof did not leak. Clara's leg healed. The clean, cold mountain air and the smoked venison worked a slow magic. She sat by the fire, her leg propped up, and she sewed. She took the canvas from his bedroll and mended their clothes. She patched the bullet hole in her dress. She took the deer hide and, following his instructions, began the long, hard work of tanning it. They did not speak of the future. They did not speak of the past. They lived day by day. He would rise before dawn to check his snares. She would keep the fire. He would hunt or chop wood. She would gather edible roots and the last of the late-season berries. They worked, they ate, they slept. The simplicity of it was a balm, healing them in a way words could not. One day, a month after they arrived, a group of riders came up the canyon. Caleb saw them a mile off. He was hidden in the rocks above the camp, his rifle steady, its sights centered on the lead rider. They were not Granger's men. They were trappers, their mules loaded with pelts, heading for the winter pass. They saw the smoke from the cabin and approached, wary, their hands on their rifles. Caleb walked down to meet them, his rifle held in the crook of his arm. They were rough men, but the mountains had their own code. They saw a man and a woman, living hard. They saw the neat cabin, the stretched deer hide. They nodded. They traded. Caleb gave them a quarter of the venison. In return, they gave him a 50-pound sack of flour, coffee beans, salt, and 2 heavy, new wool blankets. One of the men, his coat torn, saw Clara's neat stitches on her own dress. "Ma'am," he said, "I would pay you 2 bits to mend this tear in my coat." Clara mended his coat. He paid her 2 silver bits. Another man saw the saddle Caleb was mending, the one from Granger's stable, its rigging frayed. "You do leather work?" "Some," Caleb said. "My cincha is split. Pay you $1 to fix it." Caleb fixed it. He was paid $1. A new life began. They were on a forgotten trader's route. Every few weeks, a group would pass. The word spread. The man in the high canyon, Stone. He did good leather work. His wife, Clara, she sewed a fine, strong stitch. He mended saddles. He made bridles. He built a reputation. She mended clothes. She patched canvas. She sewed gloves from the hides he tanned. They earned money. $1 here, 4 bits there. They saved it in a loose pouch under their bunk. The landscape turned. The aspen leaves went from green to a brilliant, shattering gold, and then they fell, leaving silver-white skeletons against the dark pines. The nights grew colder. Winter came. It came not as a storm, but as a silence. The first snow fell, soft and thick, blanketing the canyon, hushing the stream. The high passes closed. The traders stopped. They were alone. The world was reduced to their small, smoky cabin. The two horses and the vast, white, silent expanse of the mountains. They had enough. They had smoked the last of the venison. They had flour, they had coffee, they had salt. They had built a life out of ashes. They lived in the small, warm space. The rhythm of their lives was dictated by the snow and the fire. He would go out in the mornings, checking his traps, his face wrapped in wool. He would come back, his eyebrows thick with frost. She would have the fire hot, the coffee boiling. They would sit, side by side, on the bunk he had built. He would work his leather, the sharp, clean smell of it filling the room. She would sew. One night, the snow was falling heavily. The wind was a high, thin keen around the chimney. The fire was bright. Clara was rooting through her saddlebag, the one Caleb had taken from Granger's stable. She was looking for a spare needle. Her fingers touched something soft, bundled at the very bottom, forgotten. She pulled it out. It was a dress, a simple blue cotton dress. It was not the gray wool of her marriage, nor the stained, torn remnant of her escape. It was the dress she had worn 6 years ago, the one she had thought lost in the fire. It had been in the bottom of her old saddlebag, the one she had meant to run away with, all those years ago. She stood up, holding it. The cabin was small. She could barely stand upright. She held the dress against her. It was the dress of Clara, the girl who had been free. "Caleb," she said. He looked up from the bridle he was oiling. He saw her, holding the dress, her face strange in the firelight. "I thought this was gone," she whispered. She put down her sewing. She walked to the small, cracked piece of mirror he had traded a mended saddle for. She held the dress up. She looked at her reflection. She saw the woman in the glass, the lines around her eyes, the scar on her leg, which ached in the cold, the strength in her hands. This was not the girl who had worn this dress, but the girl was still in there. She turned to him. She took a breath. She was not in a cold, dark house, desperate for warmth. She was not in a cave, desperate for safety. She was home. She took the oil lamp from the hook by the door. She unlatched the door and stepped outside. "Clara," he called, alarmed, standing up. "It is a blizzard. You will freeze." He grabbed his heavy coat and followed her. She stood in the small clearing, in the middle of the blowing snow. The night was a wild, shrieking vortex of white. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. She was just a small figure in her wool shirt and skirt. She held the lamp high. Its small, yellow flame was a beacon, illuminating the chaos. She was not shivering. She turned to face him as he came out. His breath was a white cloud in the dark. She looked at him, and in the middle of the freezing storm, she smiled. It was not the sad, broken smile he knew. It was a full, clear smile. She whispered the words, so quiet he almost missed them in the wind. "Take it off like before." Caleb froze. The words, the same words. But this was not the desperate widow, bartering her body for a moment of heat. This was not the broken victim, seeking solace in the dark. This was Clara, his Clara, whole. She held his gaze, the lamplight dancing in her eyes. "But this time," she said, her voice stronger, clearer. "It is not to forget, it is to begin." She was not asking for oblivion. She was asking for a new life. She was shedding the old skin, the one that had been burned away. A tremor ran through Caleb, a feeling so deep and powerful it almost brought him to his knees. It was not desire, not just that, It was awe. He had watched this woman be burned to the ground, and here she stood, remade, stronger than the mountains around them. He stepped toward her. He did not put the coat around her. He let it fall from his hands into the snow. He reached her. His hands, rough and scarred, came up. He did not touch her clothes. He put his hands on her face. Her skin was ice. Her hair was already white with snow. "Clara," he whispered, his voice thick. "I am here," she said. He kissed her. He kissed her there, in the heart of the blizzard, the wind tearing at them, the snow trying to bury them. He kissed her with all the years he had lost, with all the pain he had carried, with the $500 bounty and the scar on his face. He kissed her with the quiet of the land he wanted, and the roof that did not leak. She kissed him back. She kissed him with the ashes of her home, with the ghost of her lost child, with a scar on her leg. She kissed him with the dream of a dress shop and the strength in her hands. It was a kiss that sealed the past. It did not erase it. It made it the foundation of what they were now. He broke the kiss, but kept his forehead pressed to hers. They breathed the same frozen air. He gently took the lamp from her hand. He took her hand. "Come inside." He led her back into the small, warm cabin. He kicked the door shut, plunging them into the warm, fire-lit dark. The sound of the storm was muffled, distant. He set the lamp on the table. He turned to her. She stood there, her clothes dusted with snow, which was already melting, glistening in the firelight. He did not take off her clothes. He did not kiss her again. Not yet. He just held her. He wrapped his arms around her, and she wrapped her arms around him. They stood by the fire, just holding on. Later, much later, they lay in the narrow bunk, under the heavy wool blankets they had earned together. The storm still raged, but inside, the cabin was peaceful. The fire had burned down to a deep, glowing bed of red embers, casting a soft, warm light on the log walls. Clara was asleep, her head on his shoulder, her breathing slow and even. For the first time, she was not curled in on herself, protecting her wounds. She was open, relaxed, trusting. Caleb was awake. He stared at the dancing shadows on the ceiling. He felt her hand, lax in sleep, lying over his chest. He slowly moved his own hand and covered hers, his fingers lacing with hers. He was not a drifter. He was not a killer. He was not a ghost. He was home. He had no land. He had no money. He had no future, not one he could see. He had only this moment, this woman, this peace. It was enough. It was everything. He closed his eyes, his hand holding hers, and, for the first time since he was a boy, he slept without his hand on his gun. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let us know in the comments below. It is always amazing to see how far these tales travel. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to From Wild West and sharing your thoughts. We will see you on the next one.